We may live over 5,000 miles from Lincoln Financial Field, but what we lack in proximity, we make up for in film study. And each and every week, we'll be bringing you in-depth film breakdowns from across the pond and the Sooner State. Welcome to On the Shane page. I'm your host, Shane Haff. You can follow me on Twitter at ShaneHaffNFL, and I'm joined by BGN's own film guru, Jonny Page. Give him a follow on Twitter at JohnnyPage9. Jonny, how are you doing this evening?
I'm good. I am tired. This is, I said to you off air before, this is very much the depths of the off season when we're doing rounds 5, 6, and 7. Did he even have a 7th round pick, or 5 and 6 or whatever? But I have watched all these guys. I did spend a lot of my week last week watching Trevor Keegan, Dylan McMahon on offensive line films. So if you're going to watch it, we may as well talk about it. So yeah, I'm good. A little bit of a weird one. We're going to try and do this one quicker, he says. We don't do news on the pod, Shane. We don't really do news episodes. Not really like that. But I will give you 2 bits of news if you're watching live, and for anyone listening. 2 things I think are standing out from today that I've heard. Firstly, just the James Bradbury joke that they're playing him at safety. And I tweeted, there's no way he can tackle. And then within 10 minutes, he's got injured and he's currently not playing. But the other one is that Mekhi Becton is playing left guard today. And I know that Jeff Stoutland spoke a lot about his versatility when he was interviewed yesterday. So I think last week we spoke about offensive line, and seeing as we're going to talk about offensive line today as well, if Becton has a little bit of positional versatility, I think that's quite interesting, especially when we're going to talk about the guys we're going to talk about today. So yeah, for anyone listening live especially, I've literally just seen that pop up on my phone. I don't think James Bradbury will play with the safeties too much. But anyway, how are you, Shane, on this Tuesday evening?
Yes, I'm doing okay. I had a face-to-face encounter with a rather large snake earlier, and I don't do snakes, so a little shaky from that. That I have a theory that everyone has an irrational fear, and that one's mine. So I just have
is that irrational? Isn't that a very rational fear?
Well,
like snakes are legitimately dangerous. No, I mean we don't see snakes here, Shane. Like the very fact you told me you had an encounter with one is very strange to me.
No snakes in. No snakes.
I mean, we do have like the ones in the grass that like don't do any like damage. I don't think I've ever seen one in my life.
Oh well, yeah, I'm terrified of those. Like, so when I was in college one day, and I was a good student in college. I graduated summa cum laude and all that. But I was leaving my apartment, my on-campus apartment, to go to a class, and I opened the door, and there was like a tiny little 8-inch long grass snake on the porch of our apartment. And I slammed the door shut and skipped class because I was like, I can't deal with that thing. And so I had like irrational fear. I was weed eating fence line out in the pasture because I'm trying to get fencing set up for livestock and all that. And this one was quite large, but like involuntary response, dropped the weed eater. And I was like 50 yards away at a sprint before I was like, oh, I should see where that thing's going so I can come back and get it later. And so, yeah, so ran a wind sprint today. I needed somebody to clock my 40 time. I think it would have been quite fast.
Wow. I'm going to say rational fear. I'm going to call that a very rational fear. If being scared of snakes is an irrational fear, then God knows how many irrational fears I've got. Anything that can do you harm is rational. That's my theory on it anyway.
Yeah. So, other than that, we're good. This was a great excuse to not go back out in the pasture, because I will be looking over my shoulder for like the next month until I forget about this.
There you go. I'm trying desperately in my head to be like a great podcast intro and make a joke to snakes on the Eagles, but I can't think of one. So if anyone listening now is probably shouting at me, like, there's been plenty of snakes. Who was the guy years ago who left the cornerback? This is putting you on the spot.
Orlando Scandrick.
That's the one. We'll make it Orlando Scandrick. There you go. Insert Orlando Scandrick pun here. Yeah, what did he do? Play for the Eagles for like a tiny amount and then goes to ex-Cowboy, then just slated.
He was there for like 2 weeks, and then they cut him, and then he was on like talk shows blasting the Eagles, and that was a fun time.
Maybe John Stonis has got to watch out. We're coming for you with your Eagle memories at the start of our podcast. Now, there's an Eagles memories for you, Orlando Scandrick. Right, we said we're going to do a quick episode, Shane, and we spent 5 minutes talking about snakes. Mekhi Becton, James Bradbury, and now Orlando Scandrick. So shall we explain what we're doing? I'll let you just start it off and get into it.
Let's do it. So we're going to dive into the Eagles' last 3 draft picks. It is 5th round offensive lineman Trevor Keegan, and then a pair of 6th round picks in wide receiver Johnny Wilson and offensive line Dylan McMahon. So you guys that have listened, watched over the last couple of weeks, it's going to be a familiar format. We'll give you the physical profile, some relevant statistics, although there's not great statistics for offensive linemen. We'll do some strengths and weaknesses, show a few clips, and then we will get out of here feeling proud of ourselves for having finally covered all the Eagles draft picks by June 4th. So it took us a while, but this is the in-depth podcast. But we're going to try not to be so in-depth today because I don't think anybody wants an hour on Trevor Keegan, Johnny Wilson, and Dylan McMahon. But our viewers, they might surprise us. But we're going to dive in first with the Eagles' final 5th round pick at number 172 overall. They selected Trevor Keegan. Trevor Keegan is 6'5" and 3/8 of an inch, which is 85th percentile height among offensive guards. He is 310 pounds, which is 41st percentile, with 32 and 3/8 inch arm length, which is 15th percentile. He had a 61st percentile 40-yard dash. He was a good jumper with 80th percentile vertical and 78th percentile broad jump. And overall, he had a 9.2 relative athletic score. And so Trevor Keegan, coming out of the University of Michigan, a program that has done a lot of winning over the last couple years. And he was a 4-year player at Michigan. I think he only started the final 3 years, but he took 1,783 snaps at left guard over those 4 years for Michigan. In 2023, per PFF, he had a 64.6 run blocking grade and a 78.6 pass blocking grade. And he surrendered 0 sacks and 8 pressures on 298 pass blocking snaps while being flagged for 0 penalties. So there's some of the stats, the physical profile. Johnny's got an article that the Keegan one's not posted yet, correct?
Posted about an hour ago. So literally, by the time you're listening, it is out there. Yep. This is the only one that's posted. The other 2 are not.
Okay, so preview of the other 2 articles, but the Trevor Keegan article is out. The other 2 are written and will be forthcoming, so you guys can check those out. But Johnny, as you dove into the tape and watched Trevor Keegan, let's talk strengths first. What stuck out to you?
Yeah, this is the one I don't really get, and I mean that in a positive way. I don't really get how he went in the 5th round, and I have some theories. But essentially, I'm just going to say this, and then you mentioned some of this as well. Let's put it in very simple terms. Tested very well, played for 3 straight years, 0 penalties last year, and has barely given up any pressures the past 3 years. Like, when you just say that, I think sometimes people can overrate the draft. Like, if you're offering me a 5th round offensive lineman who doesn't give up many pressures, who doesn't give up many penalties, who basically has started for 3 straight years and tested very well. So I was a little bit confused. Like, when I went back to the tape and I watched him, I was confused because these guys aren't idiots. We say this all the time. NFL scouts, NFL general managers are not stupid. So I quite like the tape. I think he's quick out of his stance. I think he plays with more than enough power. I think his run blocking is pretty good. I think crucially for the Eagles, he has enough like lateral quickness. You could see him getting to the second level in both zone and gap schemes. What I absolutely loved about him, is the way he can handle stunts and sort of twists. So when he sees like to spot oncoming blitzes, I think he's really good. I think he just looks very experienced. He looks like someone who we always talk about Stoutland University. He looks like he's graduated already to an extent. Like, he looks like he understands the position well. He's not a raw athlete. That's what I expected him to be like. So I was quite surprised. I have, quite a few strengths. I think he plays with that like nasty streak that you want to see as well. So I was pretty happy overall. Before I get into sort of like why I think he fell, and I think I mentioned this, but I saw him run like outside zone counter. I saw him run pinball. So I'm pretty sure he can do what the Eagles want. Any other strengths you feel like I missed out before we talk very briefly about why I think he fell and maybe some of his weaknesses?
Yeah, I said that he plays with a really good pad level, especially for somebody that's his height, 85th percentile height. But I thought he has good pad level, and he's got the athleticism / flexibility / hand placement to target guys on the move on the second level. And they used him to do that a lot. He was used a lot. I said he was a really good gap scheme blocker, but he struggled a little more in zone blocking schemes. And, there's some clips I posted out to Twitter, and we can look at those in a minute, but of them using him as a puller in these formations. And we know the Eagles like to do that. They like to weaponize their interior offensive line. And I mean, heck, with Lane Johnson and Jordan Mailata, they'll pull anybody. And so you almost have to be able to do that if you're going to be an offensive lineman for the Eagles. And Trevor Keegan certainly checks those boxes. And then the last bullet point I gave on my strengths for him is I just said he plays well with others, in double team blocks and combo blocks. He's always looking for work if he's uncovered. And you mentioned his awareness against like stunts and twists. And I think he does a really good job, like you mentioned, of picking those up and seeing where those weaknesses are in the offensive line. So seems like a really smart player in the trenches. And like you, I really liked the value at the end of the 5th round.
Yeah, do you want to put up some of the clips, Shane, for people that are watching or people that watch after? Yeah, that was the word I'd use. I'd use smart. Like, he just looked really polished. You think for like a 5th round guard, you're going to see someone really raw, a little bit all over the place. I just didn't see that. So I'll talk about, as I said, after why I think he has not maybe made it. But talk me through the first clip. I know we've only got 2 for each.
Yeah, this is just a couple of clips of him as a puller. And, he's the left guard, so he's going to be over here sort of hidden at the start of the play on this one. But getting out on the edge, sealing those off. And I just thought, it's a couple good examples, number 77 there, of getting out. Here's targeting on the move, is able to get hands on number 6, create the lane back inside. And we're back to the first clip now. I'll just let it roll again while we talk. But I thought that was his best usage at Michigan, is when they would get him on the move in the running game. And PFF graded him out as a better pass blocker than a run blocker. I thought he was at his best as a run blocker, particularly as a puller in these sorts of schemes. And so I didn't think PFF appropriately rated how good of a run blocker he was. Personally, I would have said he's a better run blocker than pass blocker, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's just where it comes down to numbers, doesn't it? I imagine their algorithm. And that's the one I like more than any of them. The reach block, when he gets like he crosses the face of the defensive lineman. That's quite a tough block. If you look at the angle he's taken it at. So yeah, like just I liked it. Is there any other clips you had, Shane, before we get into weaknesses very quickly? Bring up the second one then. And is this remind me what one this one is?
Yeah, this one I just titled Trevor Keegan plays well with others. And there's a couple in here. On this first one, you see that he starts to engage with the defensive tackle, and that block is clearly locked down. And then he's just going to go waylay the edge rusher, puts him on the ground. He's going to do a similar thing here. Again, he's partially hidden by the goalpost, but there's just nobody comes and he doesn't have anything to do. So he just unloads on the engaged defensive tackle and puts him on the ground. And you like a guy that will play with that mean streak. And then on this last one, this is a little bit of that IQ that we talked about, passing off. This guy's the defensive tackle is going to rush to the outside and the defensive end is going to try to cross inside. And he just does a good job of realizing what's happening. And I don't even know if that was supposed to be like a stunt so much as his tackle just got beat inside and he just takes him. I guess the defensive tackle disengages and tries to loop behind. So this was probably something that was drawn up, but does a really good job of recognizing that and keeps his quarterback clean.
No, that's really good. That's my favorite thing about him. Just a very, very smart player. Like, as I said, he doesn't look raw. I was expecting him to look a lot rawer. And that's also the point I mentioned about that little bit of nasty in him. That little bit of aggressiveness that you simply have to have with an defensive lineman. But that's the clip I love. Like, there's a couple of others, if you read my article that I posted as well, where he really, really reads plays like that extremely well. And that's a sign of a good lineman to me. So if anyone listening thinking, well, hang on a minute, guys, there's a 5th round pick. Like, let's calm down. What happened? So the few things I had with him as to why I think he fell, and I've got one big reason why I think he fell. I think in space, I think actually you showed a clip of this earlier on where he's got enough athleticism to reach defenders, but I don't think he like maintains them. If you look at like Jason Kelsey, what makes him almost a freak is that he carries defenders like 5-6 yards down the field because he just, once he gets their hands on them, he can actually carry them with him. He's more of a like get there, make the block, but he won't sustain it. He almost hits too hard sometimes. It's like an initial pop and he doesn't carry them. You're going to hear me say this about every single one. This is like a trope. Like, if you ever read about offensive linemen, I guarantee you a scout will say this. They will say that he gets caught and leans forward too often. Basically, anytime I see an offensive lineman get beat in college, it seems like they're off balance because they're leaning too far forward. So it's a little bit of a generic comment to make, but you do see it occasionally. I think maybe the lack of length. The one thing he didn't test particularly well in was arm length. I wonder if he overcompensates because obviously this is very basic biomechanics, but if you've got less arm length, you end up leaning forward more to try and strike with the defensive player. Whereas if you've got longer arms, you can almost sit back and be a little bit more comfortable in your position. So sometimes he overcompensates. He sort of leans forward. He looks a little bit uncoordinated. Personally, I don't think he played like he tested. Like, I think he looked like a decent athlete on film, but he didn't look like a 9.2 RAS score type of player, in my opinion. Now, what does that mean? In my opinion, that's a good thing, because that means you've got untapped potential potentially as well. So if he hits that athletic ceiling, he could be even better. I think, and this is just a theory that I'm working with, because I'll be honest, the film does not look like a fifth round player. I think he must have failed because of his versatility. He basically played left guard his entire college career the past few years. And I think if you look around the league now, you can get guards later down. I think you want guards that have played tackle snaps. I think you want tackle that have played guard snaps. I think you want reps at center. And you definitely, I think even more important than playing different positions is playing different sides. If he had played a year at right guard and looked really good, then I think he goes in maybe the third round, for example. Because you look at a team like the Eagles, who have already got Landon Dickerson. Well, if you've already got a set left guard and you have a risk at right guard, then taking a guy who's only ever played left guard is not really going to be as high on your board as he possibly might have been otherwise. So I'm guessing it's the lack of versatility, which is the reason why he dropped. And it's not just the ability to play guard, it's the ability to take all of his college snaps on the left-hand side. We've seen a lot of offensive linemen struggle with changing sides as a rookie. And let's be honest, Trevor Keegan has got, I'm not going to say he's going to start. He's not going to start. But I think it's not an impossible possibility that if the Eagles have problems at right guard with Tyler Steen, he could play. Like, it's not unheard of. But I think the difficulty is that assumes he can transition to the right side. And quite simply, no one knows if he can do that. Even the Eagles don't know, because he's not done it in a game before. So I could only assume that is the reason why he fell. But overall, like, I think it's a really, really sensible pick. I don't really have any huge knocks with him. I think he can push Tyler Steen. I think if you have to use him this year, it's not the end of the world. And for a fifth round pick, if the worst case is he's a really good backup at left guard with a bit of positional versatility potentially to back up at right guard as well, then I'm fine with it. I think it's a really sensible pick. So anything else you want to mention on Keegan before we move on to Wilson?
Yeah, if you're a team that needs a starting left guard, then you drafted him earlier than the fifth round. And if you're a team that's drafting a backup offensive lineman, it's really hard to roster an offensive lineman that's not going to play and is also limited to one position. Because if you think about it, teams don't carry 10 active offensive linemen on game day. They just don't. Maybe you carry 8 and you need like a swing tackle that can play both tackle spots. You need a guy that can play multiple interior offensive line spots. And so I do think it devalues a guy when he's not good enough to be the starter for a team. We're not going to draft you and give you the keys, and you can't play other positions, or at least you haven't. So I do think that drops him down. I do think there's some, he lacks density and strength. Like, even on some of the, you mentioned like staying engaged on those blocks on the move. He doesn't just impact guys and knock them backwards. I also thought he struggles to anchor at times against bull rushers. And you look again at his composition, he's 85th percentile height, but only 41st percentile weight, and he's got the short arms. And so some of that body composition probably drives him down a little bit. I also thought that at times he drops his head when he's on the move. It's like he wants to drop his head and charge. And
that's
that kind of
classic
makes
lean forward. That's what I'm on about. Yeah, that's a better way of explaining it. It's hard to visualize sometimes, but that's exactly what I mean. Yep.
Yeah, it's like rhino, drop the head, charge. And that gets you off balance, and it leads to not playing under control. And so there's some things like that I think are, potential issues. Are you going to feel great if Landon Dickerson has to miss a game and Trevor Keegan has to be inserted into the starting lineup? Probably not. But if that happens a year or two from now, would you probably feel better about it? Yeah, because I think he's a guy that can develop and be a solid, backup guard for you for a long time.
Yep. I've got nothing really to add. It's funny how we described them in our notes in very different. I think the way we write is sometimes different. So I mentioned about the lack of balance. You mentioned the leaning forward ahead, but it's basically we're seeing the same thing on film, which is always a good thing. We don't talk about these players at all, by the way. Peek behind the curtain. I have no idea what Shane's going to say about these three. And Shane has read this up. No, Shane didn't even know this article was out. So you also don't know what I'm going to say about Keegan. But yeah, I think we're pretty much on the same page, which is probably a good sign. That was not a pun either. Shall we move on to an even bigger human being, arguably? Definitely his position. One of the biggest human beings with a fantastic name. Talk to me, give me the basic stats, etc., and measurables on Mr. Jonny Wilson.
He does spell his name wrong, though. But
He
Jonny
does spell his
Wilson,
name wrong. That's why he fell in the draft. That's my theory.
it's the biggest weakness I put on my scouting report, but
There we go.
uses that H. He was drafted in the 6th round at pick 185 overall. I'll throw his spider chart up on the screen here. He is 6'6" and 3/8 of an inch, which is 99th percentile, 231 pounds, which is 97th percentile, with 99th percentile arm length. So this is a massive, massive human being. And when you think about a guy at that size, his 4.52 40 time suddenly doesn't really sound that slow. And he had 79th percentile short shuttle, an 86th percentile broad jump, a 69th percentile vertical jump. And overall, he had a 9.7 relative athletic score. So he took 19.5% of his snaps from the slot in his college career. 9.8% of his snaps in 2023 came from the slot. So you can use him a bit as a big slot, but he mostly, and especially as his career went on, he found his home on the outside more. Among 335 receivers with over 40 targets this last college football season, he had 3.6 yards after the catch per reception, which ranked 278th. His yards per route run was 2.61, which was 34th. His average depth of target was 14.3, which was 69th. His drop rate was 11.4%, which was 278th. And over the last 2 years, he had a 45% contested catch rate, which ranked 208th. He forced 16 missed tackles over the last 2 years, which ranked 137th. So that's some of the stats on Jonny Wilson. Before I throw it to you, Jonny, I've got to share what there's one clip about Jonny Wilson that I've just got to show on the podcast. I'd be remiss if I don't do it before I kicked it to you. So let's take a look at this one.
Jonny Wilson is bigger and better than George Kittle. So, I forgot. You've done me so dirty there. It's absolute nonsense. For anyone who hasn't listened to previous podcasts, that is the definition of out of context. And I was making a joke about what people are going to say based on his size. I completely forgot I said that. So thank you for that.
I was really hoping that would work because I was sneakily uploading it into StreamYard and it wasn't finished processing when you joined, so I couldn't test it until just now. So I'm glad that worked. But Jonny, do you still stand by your slander of George Kittle there?
No, Jonny Wilson is not better than George. Now, what you should do now is tweet that out and cut the knot. But no, Jonny Wilson is not better. He is worse than George Kittle. There you go. I've now changed it. So unless you've got some great editing skills, which I'm sure you've got now, and you're going to tweet out now. So I'm just giving you a challenge for your evening is to try and turn that into a positive. Right. On a serious note, right. Jonny Wilson. I would use the word, shall we say, whereas Trevor Keegan is polished, let's say Jonny Wilson is not. It's pure potential. You are drafting him purely based on athleticism, size, and upside because the film isn't particularly good. Now, it's not terrible. So I put obvious strength. Guess what? I said first, Shane. He's massive. And it may be a little bit of a joke, but you know what? It does matter. Size matters. When you're 6'6" and you can line up against 5'10", 5'11" cornerbacks, run blocking, for example, that is a huge issue. Matchup specific weapon. If you've got a team that have got a really small nickel cornerback, or they've got a size deficiency in a certain part of their, say, left or right side corner, you can use him as a matchup weapon. He is not just a straight line guy. He can win in the short and intermediate game. He's really good in the middle of the field, which I think is worth noting because the Eagles have historically been bad there with Hurts. And I think Kellen Moore is going to target it more. No surprise at all. Catch radius, ability to climb a ladder, hype on the football is off the charts. There is not many receivers that are his size that can do what he can do. With that size, he can also win against press. He does get vertical, but it's very long strides. So it's slow. It takes time for him to get on top of cornerbacks. And I think the biggest reason, Shane, why he's an interesting pick is because he's huge. And being big matters massively when you're run blocking. When you compare him to something like Aina Smith that we spoke about last week, that's a big difference. You can put him in the slot, for example, and you can run outside zone and you can have him block against nickel cornerbacks, and that's a win for you. So potential is there. Absolutely worth it in the 6th round because it probably won't work out, but who the hell cares in the 6th round? If it does work out, you've got a potential player that you can use as a mismatch weapon if he makes the roster. So I'm fully on board with it as a 6th round pick. At that point, it's just worth a shot. When you compare him to other players that have failed, like really tall, like Kelvin Benjamin or Devin Funchess, correct me if I'm wrong, but they were early picks, first, second round. This is not a first, second round like bet. I think the NFL teams have possibly learned their lessons from the Hakeem Butlers of the world and these long receivers that haven't panned out. But they used to go earlier, and taking him in the 6th round is just like, why the hell not? Like, what's the worst case scenario that happens? He doesn't make the team because he's not very good. But at least I want to shoot for upside in the 6th round. So yeah, that is my rationale for what Jonny Wilson does well. Have you got any clips? Well, I know you do, but have you got some of the things that you want to talk through that back up sort of what I've said as well there?
Yeah, Kelvin Benjamin was actually a 1st-round pick by the Panthers. I don't remember.
Yeah,
Who was the other one you said?
I think Devin Funchess was 2nd round.
Yeah, I don't remember on Funchess, but
I'll Google it as you talk. But yeah, I'm pretty sure he was 2nd. But yeah, go for it. Show us some clips.
Yeah, my first bullet point, I wrote in all caps, massive frame with all caps, massive catch radius. Fun fact about Jonny Wilson, his arms are 10% longer than Trevor Keegan's, and they're 12% longer than Dylan McMahon, who we're going to talk about in a minute. So he's just got like massive alligator arms, and it allows him to have a pretty big catch radius, and he can make some incredible catches. And so here's one that I clipped up. He's up here at the top of the screen, and it'll show a better view from the side on the replay, but this is an incredible catch. He gets behind the guy, and it's just a fingertip catch, full extended arms. And it's an impressive catch, and it makes one of the weaknesses we'll talk about in a moment just that much more infuriating. But look at that catch. That catch radius he brings is so good. And you mentioned him as a run blocker, and there's just some comical reps of him run blocking. So our astute viewers will notice this is not Florida State. He started his career at Arizona State, and he's down here at the bottom of the screen. He's going to run block on this corner, and just watch this. Like, this is a thing of beauty. Just how you do not often see a receiver like forklift a cornerback 7 yards and pancake him. Like that cornerback's a bit of his soul left his body that day, and he was never the same again. And so the run blocking is absolutely a huge plus for Jonny Wilson. And it's not even that like he's like the most technically sound run blocker. He can just overwhelm guys physically. And with all of that, he moves better than you would expect at his size, and he's better than expected at route running technique. He doesn't try to be like he's not like a bully ball player that just blasts guys off the line if they try to press him and dominates the catch point. He really tries to like run technically refined routes. Now, I wouldn't say he's good at it. I would say he's better than expected for a 6'6", 230-pound guy. There's certainly room for him to improve at that down the road, though.
Yeah, I would agree. He's a bit of a weird player. He doesn't play like you expect. Devin Funchess was a 2nd-round pick for everyone desperately wondering. So yeah, the NFL has drafted players like this earlier before. There is talent there. Like, don't get me wrong, there is talent. But when I read out the weaknesses, people are going to think, is he just not very good? So when you look at his weaknesses, like obviously,
can I start with my first bullet point on weaknesses?
Yeah, I think you've got a great one that just sums up all of mine in one, isn't it? So go for it.
Yeah, my first bullet point, I said he can't get open, can't catch the ball, and can't create yards after the catch. I mean, if you just go look at it, and that's funny because I just mentioned like he's a better route runner than you would expect. But what you expect of a 6'6", 231-pound guy is that there is no separation. And so he gets that sometimes, but not great. And then, he's not a great contested catch player. 208th out of 335 on contested catch percentage, 278th in yards after catch, and 278th in drop percentage. So, there's a lot of tantalizing things, but he has some frustrating drops, and he's just a less physical player than you would expect. And he's not a yak threat. And so if you want to know why he was available in the 6th round, can't get open, can't catch, can't create yards after the catch.
Yeah, there's no twitch to him. There's no burst. I pretty simply said like struggles with his hands, which is a huge worry, drops too many balls, doesn't dominate contested situations, doesn't dominate in the red zone, clunky movement, awkwardness at time, too slow to get up to full speed, so will struggle against better corners. The way and by the way, I had him, if people are shouting at me saying, but I read your draft comment and you quite liked him. I still do quite like him potentially. Like, I got him wrong based on when the NFL would see him. I said like round 4. I had him in the tier with like Tez Walker, Jalen McMillan, Jacob Cowing. Like they went earlier than he did. Well, I think they did anyway. But I don't particularly like this kind of player. I said that in my film review, which you haven't seen yet because it's not come out. But I said I don't particularly like him. And he feels like another Kelvin Benjamin, Devin Funchess, who upside is there, but they don't pan out. I feel like I summarized this quite well in my article. So I just said, very simply, he has two major issues. He doesn't dominate the catch point, and he doesn't separate well enough. And I said, now you can make the argument he can have a successful career if he learns to do one of those things. So I'm almost like pick your battle. He either needs to dominate the catch point or he needs to separate. And if he does one of them, maybe he can have a career. If he does neither of them, he's done. Don't care how big you are. So it's basically what you said. I didn't mention the yards after catch because I guess I care less about that for a 6'6" guy. But basically, it's those two things. It's very simple with him. Can he separate? Can he win at the catch point? I'm not sure how well you can teach either of those things. Like it may be the size just doesn't enable him to separate. And if you can't catch the ball particularly well, I'm not sure how much you can change that. Like how much of that is just coordination. So my guess is he doesn't work out, but it's worth a shot. I will just very quickly say before we move on, because we're still running late, Shane, as we always do somehow. And we're sort of half okay. But I hate the idea of moving his tight end. So please delete that from anyone who's tweeted that. Just scrap it. I don't know how many times we spoke about this, Shane. People who have listened to me a number of times know this. 12 personnel only works if you have the threat of running and blocking. Jonny Wilson maybe had a block a little bit for a receiver. He is not an inline tight end. If you put him at tight end, every single NFL team is going to go, sweet, we're staying in nickel, and we're still going to treat him as a wide receiver. He may as well be a wide receiver just in line. Like, it does nothing for your offense. If he's going to succeed, he's going to succeed at wide receiver. If you can name, like, the next wide receiver who's his size and his length and his weight who becomes a tight end and succeeds, then fair play. But I basically think it's impossible. Like, I don't see any point in putting him at tight end. And I think Nick Sirianni made it pretty clear when they drafted him that they do not see him as a tight end, which is excellent. I think he's worth a shot in the dark. Who knows? Maybe he works. Maybe he never separates well, but he does learn to catch a little bit better. And at the very worst case, maybe you use him as a big guy in the red zone to catch and throw a few fades to, and he's worth having as a wide receiver 6 on your roster because of what he can do as a blocker. And I do think there's a legitimate reason that you could keep him as a wide receiver 6 and use him in specific situations, because I think this team's identity should be running the football, but please don't move him to tight end. Like, he's a receiver, end of. If he fouls at receiver, cut him, get another receiver. Just don't take up a tight end position on your roster with Jonny Wilson, because if it works, then I'm totally wrong. You can tweet this and you can come back at me, but I just don't see how his profile is going to fit a tight end at all.
Yeah, as you're talking about just using him as a big guy in the red zone, Dorial Green Beckham just kept coming into my head as the guy that I thought they were going to do that with years ago.
That's the other guy I should have mentioned, really, rather than Devin Funchess. Yeah, it just didn't work, did it? He had effort issues, though, as well. I think whether Jonny Wilson, we can't speak to character. Dorial Green Beckham had more talent, but was just, I think, a bit of an idiot, basically.
Yeah, I would say Jonny Wilson is a tremendously low floor player, but his sheer size gives him a high ceiling if he's able, like you said, to do one of those two things: learn to separate, learn to be a contested catch guy. And all of a sudden, the rest of the NFL looks silly for letting him fall to the 6th round. The chances of that happening are pretty small, but don't take that as me hating the pick. I love the pick. That's the dart throw you should be making in the 6th round. Go get me a freakishly sized guy or someone with freakish athleticism. And the Eagles went for freakish size there. So
Final point. I think the Eagles wide receiver room is really interesting in general. I think there's such a great blend of different sizes and different speeds. And I think they want to be a little bit more maybe matchup specific as well. And I think you've got just a lot of different profiles now with like John Ross obviously coming in, Paris Campbell, Smith, Jonny Wilson. You've just got a number of different styles of players. If they want to keep like a wide receiver 6 who can block and do the occasional thing in the red zone, go for it. Like I think, as you mentioned, it's definitely worth it. It's absolutely worth it. Right, let's move on. Final Eagles draft pick of 2024. We've got there in the end. Talk to me, Shane, about, is it Dylan McMahon? Is that how you pronounce his surname?
Dylan McMahon, I think.
Dylan McMahon. Who knows? My own pronunciations are all wrong. It's the English in me. So talk to me about, let's just call him Dylan. Talk to me about offensive lineman. Let's not call him Dylan. I can't take him seriously calling him that.
Let's just call him Jason Kelce Jr.
There we go. Go for it. Talk to me about him.
All right. So he is 6'3" and 3/8 of an inch, which is 51st percentile among centers, 299 pounds, which is 26th percentile. He has 13th percentile arm length, 18th percentile hand size. He had a 91st percentile vertical and a 98th percentile broad jump. And all in all, he had a 9.78 relative athletic score. So when you take a center, a pick before the Jason Kelce pick, and he's got basically the same profile. And Jonny, I know you tweeted out the redacted scouting reports for Dylan McMahon and Jason Kelce and asked people to guess which was which. There's a lot of similarities in like their scouting profiles. McMahon played 761 snaps at left guard, 848 snaps at center, and 1,153 snaps at right guard in his collegiate career. So he has that interior versatility. That said, he played center in 2023. He's likely a center only at the next level. And in 2023, he allowed 1 sack and 11 pressures on 345 pass block snaps. He also committed 5 penalties, and that's not an anomaly. He committed 20 total penalties across the last 4 years. So he is a bit of a penalty-prone guy. What did you see when you watched Dylan?
Dylan, there we go. A couple of things, Shane, just because you mentioned about tweeting it out. So for those of you who don't know on Twitter, I tweeted out NFL.com. So the same websites scouting like overall review of Jason Kelce and Dylan McMahon. Or Dylan McMahon, oh my God, I can't do this anymore. I should DM. And basically, these are the responses. So Jason Kelce was the answer. I think you got it right, so well done to you, Shane. These are the responses I got. I'm not going to read out, obviously, the handles, but I got Kels is B, A is Kels, A is Kels, Kels is B, A is Kels, Kels is B, B is Kels, A is Kels, B is Kels. So it was really split. So I was quite interested by that. Like their scouting reports are identical. Obviously, I haven't released my article on him yet, but I did put in the conclusion there is a 0.01% chance he becomes Jason Kelce. Yes, he was picked at basically the same pick in the same round, but it's not going to happen. But I do think it's pretty interesting how the Eagles clearly have a type. So I quite liked him. I think like Jody Wilson, he's a bit risky. And unlike Trevor Keegan, I think Trevor Keegan's like a safe pick. I think this could just not work. Like, I think he might not have the juice to play in the NFL. He might just be too weak. But he's really, really good in space. Really fluid, gets to the second level, can win in the screen game. Like, really good in sort of the same way Kelce's at pulling. For what it's worth, Josh Norris does an offensive line athleticism test. He passed it, which if any of you follow Josh Norris's offensive line test, he basically thinks it's like a cheat code for guys that last in the league because anyone who passes this threshold ends up being decent half the time. I think only 5 players in this year's class passed it, and he was one of them. So that's a pretty good sign, you'd have to say overall. Just like Trevor Keegan, really aware of stunts and twists, extremely explosive out of his stance, experienced, played for 4 years, unlike Trevor Keegan. 40% of his snaps at right guard, 33% of snaps at center, and 26% at left guard. I do not think that actually matters with him because I think he's a center at the next level only. But at least he's got some experience if he does make it as like a 9th or 10th offensive lineman. Before I talk about why I'm not sure he'll make it, even though I like the profile, you do have a few clips, don't you? So do you want to show up a few clips on the screen, and then I'll talk to you to finish off about maybe the weaknesses and what we think overall with him.
Yeah, I've just got 2 clips of him in run blocking here. The first one is a combo block, which combo block is where you double team with another offensive lineman. In this case, it's the right guard before he basically hits the defensive tackle to make sure the right guard's got him under control. And then you work up to the next level to tag the linebacker or the safety. And I think he's really good at executing those combo blocks. The athleticism he's got, that explosiveness allows him to hit and then get on the move to the second level. And so I thought he does that a lot on tape. And then this is him on a zone block. This is actually an RPO, but he's zone blocking. If you watch like it'd be the left tackle on the right of the screen, you can tell he's pass blocking. This is an RPO, but it's going to be a give. And McMahon is able to get out on the defensive tackle, and he's able to just take him out of the play and gives that big cutback lane, which what in the world is this running back looking at? By the way, Jonny, you're the running game guy. Like, it takes him like 3 steps too long to realize that there's a hole you could drive a semi truck through right up the middle. But so goes lower level competition in college football, and why I'm so ready to get back to watching NFL all 22.
It's like some Wendell Smallwood vision type there. Throwback to anyone on my account who's followed me for a number of years. BLG, if he's listening, will laugh at that one. BLG knows I had a hatred of Wendell Smallwood. I shouldn't say that word. I just didn't like Wendell Smallwood's game. I think he was like the most overrated running back I've ever seen from Eagles Twitter, and I found it incredibly frustrating watching him. So I would routinely point out. So if anyone that's followed me for a long time on Twitter, you've had an Orlando Scandrick throwback today, and there's your Wendell Smallwood throwback. Yeah, that second clip is awesome, except for the running back who's got no idea what he's looking at. The short area quickness, the speed to jump out of his stance is really, really good. So again, if you're wondering, well, it all sounds pretty good. Jason Kelce scouting report can get to the second level. I think it's really important as another strength to mention. He can do what the Eagles want. I joked about the Eagles have a type when you compare to the Jason Kelce scouting report, but it's not really a joke. Like Cam Jurgens, Jason Kelce, DM, they are all similar in their profile. Like they very clearly need a center to do what they want to do schematically, who can win in space. And I think that's a huge part of the Eagles offense. The issue I've got, Shane, is I don't know if he has the juice. And when I say the juice, I mean, can he actually hold up one-on-one against defensive tackles? I'm not sure he can anchor at all. And I think when he loses, he starts grabbing. I think 6 penalties last year. Compare that to Trevor Keegan, who had none. There's also not a lot of push in the run game. I think unless he's sort of in a combo block one-on-one, he's going to struggle. Now, Jason Kelce struggled to anchor for a number of years. He only really got the strength in his latter years. But Jason Kelce was unbelievably good at everything else. So you didn't really mind the lack of anchor. But I still remember fans who wanted to get rid of him a few years ago when he was routinely getting beat one-on-one in pass protection. So who knows? He's not going to be Jason Kelce. Could he be a sort of backup version of Jason Kelce who can do a job behind Cam Jurgens? I think he could. And I think Jeff Stoutland, if there's anyone you want to develop, a guy like this is going to absolutely love Jason, this kind of player. So I think that's really, really cool. But I do worry that maybe he's just a little too undersized. Like if he doesn't make it, I think it's just simply because he's not strong enough. And can he develop that in the gym? Can he get bigger? Maybe. But if he does that, does he lose his athleticism? I don't really know. So he's an interesting one. But at the end of the day, he's a 6th round offensive lineman. So the odds of him making it are already unlikely anyway. But I think he's got a chance. I think he's a fun guy to watch in the preseason. And I think he's on the perfect team to develop him into a backup. I just hope he doesn't have to play anytime soon because I think he needs a little bit of time in the weight room. I think he needs to get stronger. And if he can do that, then the athleticism's there. The ability in space is there. It's just the anchor and the strength that I have the real concern with.
Yeah, if you could guarantee me that every play he was on the field was going to be some sort of zone blocking play to get him to the second level or out in space, or some sort of pin pull that could get him out on the perimeter, I would feel better about it. But at the end of the day, you have to be able to pass protect. You've got to be able to deal with a Dexter Lawrence that's lined up as a zero technique on you and you don't get any help. And I just don't think he can do that. He's got super short arms, just almost non-existent anchor. And so, yeah, the Jason Kelce scouting report, but I think people have to remember that there's like a 95% chance Jason Kelce washes out of the league in the first 2 seasons. The 5% is what it turned into. And it's the same thing with like a Jordan Mailata. And it will be the same thing with Dylan McMahon if it works out. It will be a long shot. But again, that's the type of dice roll you should be taking in the 6th round. You're not drafting a starter. You're drafting a guy that he's probably not going to hit. But if he does hit, he's got a unique skill set like we talked about earlier. So again, I like the pick. I really like what the Eagles did with, mostly the exception of what they did with the Jalix Hunt pick for reasons we've talked about, but draft as a whole, I really like the way they approached it.
Yeah, and I think worst case, you've got a player who at least fits your scheme. And when you draft, you don't want to draft for need, you want to draft for scheme more. And I think he couldn't go to a better team. And I think everything the Eagles want to do at center, he fits the bill. So, yeah, I hope he doesn't play this year. I don't think he should have to as a 6th round pick. But he's an interesting one to finish on, isn't he?
Yes, absolutely. So that is going to about do it for our Eagles draft pick film review. We're looking to take a break potentially from the film room next week to do a different sort of show and then maybe come back and briefly cover some of the Eagles UDFAs the week after that. But Jonny, before we get out of here, under an hour, I might add, for the first time in show history, do you have less than 15 minutes of final thoughts so we can continue to say we got out under an hour?
Yeah, this is my 16th minute rant on Gabe Hall, Eagles UDFA that I was watching before the podcast. No, we would definitely get out before the hour. No, firstly, if you are listening, thank you very much. It's normally dead time in podcast land and Eagles land. We're going to keep going because we're starting something new. So we sort of feel like we have to. If you do have any ideas of what things you want to cover us, like schematic trends, we're going to basically try and get some really good guests on. The off season is really exciting because you can just talk about anything and everything. So please stick with us if you can. As always, leave the reviews, but also tweet us anything you want us to cover. If there's any like schematic trends that you want us to look at, then please do. And appreciate the fact that Shane has told me there's still a fair few hundred watching live us break down Trevor Keegan, Jonny Wilson, and DM, which is blowing my mind. So thank you for the guys watching. Anthony, you just commented, yeah, really appreciate you. And we're not going to go anywhere. We will definitely do some random stuff. We will get to UDFAs because if you're here for the sickness of Eagles football, then you've got to have a show on Eagles UDFAs. But I need another week to watch them. So I don't want to ever do this podcast and not be prepared because people will know when I'm not prepared because I'll just talk utter nonsense. I need to be prepared at this stuff. So give us a week to look at the UDFAs. We'll try and get some cool guests on next week. And then, yeah, any ideas you got, please tweet us.
Yes, absolutely. Shout out to Anthony for the comment and the rest of you that are watching live that maybe couldn't comment because you're pretending to work right now. We do appreciate you guys. Be sure you are subscribed to the Eagles Pinpool Network wherever you get your podcasts, most notably Apple Podcasts, Spotify. 5-star ratings and reviews really help us get the show out there. We're trying to build something really cool here, sort of a BGN radio replacement, if you will. So we've got some stuff in the pipeline for post-game shows and some preview shows and an NFC East look-around show. And we're going to be trying to bring in people and get this fully staffed as we approach the regular season. But you guys keep it tuned to the network. If you want to support Jonny and I further, you can check out our Patreon, patreon.com/ontheshanepage. You get an ad-free version of the podcast, which I know the original feed is still ad-free because the ad approval stuff's still pending, but there will start to be pre and mid-roll ads. Patreon will get the show without ads. You'll also get some creative control of the podcast behind the scenes, helping us pick players to focus on, access to a Discord server where we can just chat and things like that. So if you want to check that out, there is a $3 and $5 tier. The main podcast will always stay free. We'll do some special bonus stuff as we get into the season, but we appreciate you guys so much. Thank you for tuning in. Stay tuned to the feed. Later this week, we will have a Birds of the Roundtable show. John's going to be back on Friday with another Eagles Memories episode, and then Jonny and I will be back next week. So we will catch you guys then.